Welcome to UGC's CEC program, and today's episode we will discuss about the eutrophication and siltation in wetlands and the major contents: eutrophication, the steps in eutrophication process, the causes for eutrophication, siltation, the causes for siltation and the advantages and disadvantages of siltation. First, let us see what is the meaning of eutrophication. See, the harmful changes in water caused by too much fertilizer or nutrients getting into the water, that is called eutrophication. See, for example, in any water ecosystem, when too much nutrients are accumulated, for example, the fertilizer or the phosphorus, nitrogen, etc., when too much materials are accumulating, then what will happen? The water starts contaminating, and that process is called the eutrophication. See, you look at the diagram. See, it is a water ecosystem, and see, and there are some algae, and they have developed on the surface, and the quality of the water or the quality of the ecosystem is also not that much good, and therefore, it has happened because of too much nutrients that is accumulated in the water ecosystem. And now, look at the diagram. Let us discuss the oligotrophic lake with a low level of nutrients, because every water ecosystem, some amount of nutrients that it can sustain, and therefore, at that equilibrium, the plants and animals and they can live together, and therefore, it is a healthy ecosystem. And therefore, you see there are some plants and oxygen, the water is clear, some fishes, and therefore, this is a ecosystem which is having a low level of nutrients. And now, the artificial input of nutrients from runoff and discharge of effluents, because of the discharge of effluents, some amount of nutrients that is accumulating or that is coming, and the runoff from the agricultural land, and that means they are the fertilizers, and the effluent containing detergent or partially treated sewage also, and therefore, in these two ways the effluents or the nutrients they are coming, they are reaching the water ecosystem. Then what will happen? The eutrophic lake with a high level of nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus are usually the bio-limiting element in freshwater lakes, and therefore, they are limiting the biology of the freshwater lake. And see, there is a large amount of nitrogen and phosphorus. Now, let us see what is the result of it. Turbidity increases because of the nutrients, and therefore, the rate of sedimentation is also increasing. See, the turbidity, because the algae it has started, because the algae by using the phosphorus and nitrogen, it has started growing, and therefore, the turbidity or the cloudiness has increased, and at the same time, because of the effluents, the sedimentation is also increased. And now, you see some slightly large number of fish, and therefore, this is the condition when the more number of nutrients they are accumulated on the water ecosystem. And now, what is the result? A rapid growth of algae and other biomass, resulting in the decrease of dissolved oxygen, and therefore, as the algae that is taking a large amount of oxygen, what will happen? The amount of oxygen has started decreasing, and therefore, the oxygen is gradually decreasing, and the rapid growth of algae. So, the algae has started increasing in their population. And see, the increased growth of rooted plants such as reeds, and therefore, on the banks or on this area, the reeds have also started increasing, and the net result is that there is no oxygen, and therefore, the fish cannot live because it is in the anaerobic condition, and so the fish cannot live, and therefore, in that anoxic condition and release of noxious gases such as hydrogen sulphide and ammonia, and they are emitted from the water, and therefore, the net result is that the amount of oxygen has reduced, and so the number of fishes that also has reduced, and there is no water plants now. So, the only remaining things are the algae and a large amount of hydrogen sulphide and ammonia and other gases, and a large amount of the anoxic sedimentation also, and therefore, the ultimate result, the algal blooms during the summer months, and the dissolved oxygen levels are at their lowest at night when the plants are respiring rather than undergoing the photosynthesis. And because the plants are not having sufficient oxygen, and therefore, they respire rather than the photosynthesis, and so this can be explained by this algorithm also. See, from the fertilizer side and from the sewage side, the nitrates and phosphates, and therefore, the eutrophication starts, and the algae they have developed in large amount that we call as algal bloom, and because of a large amount of algae they are on the surface, there is a competition for light, and the consumers cannot consume fast enough also, because large amount of algae, less number of consumers, that means the fish, and therefore, they cannot consume fast enough, and so the result is a dead algae. The algae has started dying, and because there is no or very less amount of water, the plants have started dying, and so a large amount of detritus, that means the dead plants and animals have accumulated, and resultant is more decomposers, because when the dead animals are increasing, naturally the decomposers like bacteria, virus and other things, and they will start developing, and so what happens, the use of oxygen by aerobic respiration, and therefore, the amount of oxygen is decreasing, and therefore, all the aerobes die, that means the invertebrates, fish etc., they are dying, and the anaerobic condition is prevailing, and therefore, the bacteria thrive, and that releases a large amount of ammonia and hydrogen sulphide. And so, this is depicting the eutrophication systematically, and so the biochemical oxygen demand, this measures the rate of oxygen consumption by a sample of water, and therefore gives a good indication of eutrophication. A high BOD, that means a high biochemical oxygen demand, means lots of organic material and aerobic microbes, that means there is eutrophication, and the addition of nutrients, growth of plants, death of plants, growth of bacteria, lack of oxygen and suffocation. So, these are all the various stages in the eutrophication process. Now, the same thing is depicted by this diagram, and actually the eutrophication is a natural process. The humans in their every day-to-day activities can exacerbate the process. Actually, the eutrophication is not caused only through human being, but the humans in their every day-to-day activity can exacerbate it, they can enhance the eutrophication process, and sewage treatment plant discharges and the storm sewer discharges, the industrial discharge, the atmospheric deposition and the agricultural runoff, the fertilizer and soil erosion and the septic system. So, all these are various causes for the eutrophication. So, some are natural and some are man-made, and the diagram is depicting the fish died due to eutrophication because it has removed all the oxygen, and therefore, the fishes they are dying in a large number. And see the lake Biwa, and it is the largest lake in Japan, and during summer time, and it is showing the overgrowth of aquatic plants, and therefore, you look at the diagram. See the water system, water ecosystem, it is totally contaminated. A large amount of algae has been on the surface of the water, and therefore, it is because of the eutrophication. And now, let us come to the second topic, that is the siltation. See, what is the meaning of siltation? An undesired increased transport and sedimentation of suspended material is called siltation. See, undesired, that means it is not desired. Increased transport and sedimentation, that means the suspended material, undesired suspended material, they are increased amount and they are transported and they are sedimented is called siltation, and it is a major source of pollution in waterways. And therefore, the siltation is another problem which is on the waterways, and particularly that it is a problem for wetland, because actually the wetland that is in between the land and the aquatic ecosystem, and therefore, it is one of the major problem for the wetland ecosystem. And the sedimentation is the deposition of particles carried by a fluid flow. So, whenever the fluid is flowing, it is carrying a large amount of nutrients or matter, and therefore, gradually they are accumulated and they are becoming the sedimented, and so whenever the fluid is flowing, automatically that it is resulting in some sedimentation or the siltation. And look at the diagram, and actually here the sand, and actually it is an estuary, and see a large amount of material, particularly the granules or clay or minerals, and they have been deposited here, and therefore, this process is called sedimentation, because the water is flowing, and so with the water a large amount of granules, particularly the particulate matter or the particles, and therefore, this process is called sedimentation. See, there is a relationship between the particle size and the energy for erosion, transportation and deposition, because for transportation also the particles need energy, and therefore, there is a relation between the particle size and the amount of energy necessary for erosion and transportation, and the diagram is given in this graph. See, on the x axis it is in diameter of grain, that is in millimeter, and on y axis the average velocity, that is centimeter per second. So, if the particle size is 0.001 millimeter, then that is coming under the category clay, and therefore, what is the velocity of the clay? It may range. So, that is given here, and so naturally the 0.001 that is a clay soil, and 0.01 that is the silt, and 0.1 that is the sand, and 1 that is in between the sand and gravel, and 10 that is gravel. And so, you look at the diagram, as the particle size is increasing, the velocity that is decreasing, and then once it is beyond a particular level, again the velocity has started increasing. Now, let us have a short break. Welcome back from break. Let us proceed. See, as the particle size is increasing, then from clay, silt, sand and gravel, and therefore, the velocity is decreasing. That means, the clay soil that may move with more velocity and silt with less velocity, and therefore, depending upon that the erosion also. That means, if they are moving at a faster rate, That means they are eroded more faster than the other material, and therefore, the critical erosion velocity. So, in this region, that is called the critical erosion velocity, that is around some 100 centimeter per second. And so, this diagram is clearly showing that there is a relationship between the particle size and the energy for erosion, transportation and deposition, and therefore, depending upon their size, different types of material, they are eroded at different rates. And now, in worldwide distribution of sediments by composition is strongly related to the latitude and climate also, because the type of soil at a particular place, that depends upon the latitude and the climatic condition in that particular area also, and therefore, there is a particular relationship between the type of soil available and the latitude and climate, and therefore, depending upon that, the sedimentation that can be divided into some categories. The first category is calcareous biogenic sediments, and they are dominating in tropical shelves. That means, in the tropical region, calcareous biogenic, because the tropical places or the tropical forest, they are characterized with a lot of biotic environment, and therefore, the sedimentation happening in the tropical island, tropical places, and they are the biogenic sediment. They are dominating in the tropical ecosystem. And the second, the river supplied sands and muds, they are dominating the temperate shelf. That means, in the temperate environment, that is river supplied sand and muds, they are dominating the sediment. And the third variety, glacial, till and ice rafted sediment dominate the polar shelf, because in the polar region, it is mostly icy area, and therefore, the glacial and ice rafted sediment, that is prevailing in most of the polar ecosystem. And therefore, the sedimentation distributed in the world, that is dominated by what is the latitude and what is the climate prevailing in that particular area, and therefore, depending upon that, it may be calcareous or river supplied or glacial. And now, there is a model depending upon the previous few theories, there is a model, and that model is depicting the various type of sedimentation prevailing in various areas, and here that is divided according to their latitudes. See here the tropical region, and so the tropical region, it is dominated by the rivers, and therefore, here the sedimentation, that is river sedimentation or the silt sedimentation. And here you see that polar region. So, in the polar region, the glacial or the marine sediment, and therefore, in all the polar region, it is the glacial sedimentation, and in all the tropical region, it is biogenic sedimentation, and in other places, depending upon the latitude, different types of sedimentations, they are possible or they are available at that particular ecosystem. Now, what are the sources, the potential sources for the siltation? See, one potential source, that is the quarry, urban areas and agricultural areas, and therefore, the quarries in the industrial area and the agricultural waste, and therefore, they are the one possible cause for the siltation, and that is shown in this diagram. And therefore, all this sedimentation and they are coming, and so and here in this region they are sedimented, and so the quarry waste, agricultural waste and the urban areas, and they are one causes for the potential source. And another potential source, that is landslides and the peak disturbance. That means, because of the landslide also, a large amount of particles they are displaced from the land into the waterways, and therefore, because of that also the sedimentation or the siltation is happening, and it can be natural significant source of sediment, but recover quickly because it is a natural thing which is happening, and therefore, it can recover immediately. And one more thing, the landslides, they are not in all the places and they are rare occurrence, and therefore, even though it occurs, they can recover very quickly. And so, the landslide, that is the second major potential sediment source. See, that is shown in the diagram. See the quarry, high levels of sediment runoff during the rains, because in the quarry region a large amount of sand that is released, and when there is a rainy season, that particles they are running off, and therefore, they are starting and they are sedimenting at the some other waterways. And depending upon the rainfall intensity and the amount of sedimentation, that is also more, and so that is the major cause, quarry. And see, these are all various diagrams which are depicting the various activities happening in the quarry. And so, the sand, the breaking of stones, and therefore, all these are producing a large amount of silt, and that silt is carried over through water. And see, you look at the color of the water, and that is somewhat brown in color, and so this contains a large amount of sedimentation, and therefore, when the water is reaching the ground or the estuaries and all, there they deposit all the silt. And another source of transportation of sediment, and that is coral ecosystem. Actually, where the sedimentation that is affecting, mostly they are reaching the estuaries, and therefore, near the estuaries or at low water level in the marine ecosystem, the coral ecosystem is there, and therefore, most of the time the siltation that is affecting the corals, and sometimes the storms are causing muddy plume from stream to reef, and so because of the storm also the sedimentation is happening. So, the drainage from household also can be a potential cause. So, here you see the drainage from a house, and therefore, it also contains a large amount of sediments, and therefore, that is also one of the cause for the siltation. And see, now let us see what are the advantages and disadvantages of siltation. And see, due to natural flooding, the silt is lost, and the flooding enables silt to be placed on farmland, making it more fertile, and therefore, because of the siltation, the nutrients are transported from one point to another point, and therefore, see, when the water is flowing through the river, all the places or all the farms which are on either both banks of the river, and they are getting a large amount of silt, and therefore, it is increasing the fertility of the lands, and without flooding, the farm lands become less fertile, and therefore, they may lose money, and economically speaking, or starve. And therefore, without flooding, there is the fertility is decreasing, and therefore, it is a problem for the production also. And some more problem created by the sedimentation in lake, because the sedimentation can happen at many places, and mostly it is on the estuaries or the ocean backwaters, and in the lake also, because the lake or the dam site, they are also constructed on the waterways only, and therefore, in the lake ecosystem also the sedimentation is happening. And so, what are the possible problems created by the siltation in the lake? See, the lake infilling, and reducing the effective depth, because the sedimentation that is going to the bottom, and therefore, the bottom level sedimentation is increasing, and therefore, the relative depth of the water that is decreasing, and therefore, the storage capacity of water in a particular lake or dam that is also decreasing. And so, the effective depth is coming down, and erosion downstream of dam, because when the water is released from the dam, what will happen? All the silt that is removed from the bottom of the water, and therefore, there is a erosion and downstream, and deepening of the delta, and loss of nutrients to farmlands, and loss of nutrients to delta estuary, and therefore, these are all some problems created by the sedimentation in lakes. Now, let us summarize. In this episode, eutrophication, the steps in eutrophication process, what are the causes for eutrophication, siltation, the causes of siltation, and the advantages and disadvantages of siltation, all the topics have been discussed so far. And now, let us have some questions. Define eutrophication. Second question, write the processes involved in eutrophication. And the third, what are the impact of eutrophication on wetland plants and animal? That means, in what ways the eutrophication is impacting the wetland water and the water plants and animals, and mention some potential sources of siltation, and write the problems created by siltation. That means, what are the problems associated with the siltation? And the last question, how the distribution of sediments by composition is strongly related to the latitude and climate. Let us conclude now, and now thank you.